Welcome back. I'm your host, Lauren O'Brien. This is Black Sheep and Bad Apples, the podcast where I script something very sober and go ahead and recite it in various states of inebriation. I would love to introduce you guys, our listeners, to the guys here in the studio. We're going to start off with this guy wearing the nice little, what you call that thing?
It's a flat cap.
Flat cap. How you doing, baby?
Newsy hat?
It's a flat cap.
That's Mr. Sam, by the way.
Not a newsy hat.
Sam.
Golf cap?
You're a golf cap.
Kangle.
Yeah, what's up, man? How's it going?
going
Thanks for
good.
having me on here.
Yeah, thank you. And we got a special guest with us tonight. Go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Hello. I am fellow human being.
Oh, now I don't believe him.
Special like a short bus.
My name's Matthew Wallace. I wasn't expecting to be here, but here I am.
Here you ma'am.
Here I is.
Yep.
We got,
Good
as
words
always,
today, folks.
Mr. Joseph Desse.
Howdy, howdy.
Oh, Joseph.
Oh, good to see all
Joseph.
y'all.
And then the producer, who's more or less hiding in the background at this point of the podcast.
Dr.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's Sean.
Man, I forgot about Dr. Dre.
Well, yeah, we don't
Round of
bring up
applause.
Dr. Dre's in the background
I'll put that
mixing
in
all of this.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
thank you for having us here at Fourth Corner.
Oh, yeah.
How y'all feeling during this stay-at-home kind of
What?
bullshit
I thought that ended.
in Oregon?
I didn't notice because I don't have a home.
It's
I
okay.
don't have
That's, yeah. Yeah, it's been pretty shitty for all of us. In fact, like one thing I love about, podcasting from such faraway places on the internet like we're doing is that it
We're on the moon.
feels like we're all in the same room together.
Right next door to Alex Jones' private obelisk.
Yeah. Yep.
He's got an obelisk?
On the moon. You didn't know?
Oh.
And he will eat your ass.
Oh, he
I bet he will. I fucking bet he
definitely
will.
said he was going to eat our asses. I'm really hoping that that's going to
Did you hear his apology for it?
Well, I heard him say that he was that he was being satirical and that he
And
was
then he went
basically
right
like,
back
I
to
don't
it."
understand why people don't get it that I'm making jokes when I am making jokes.
But
'Cause,
then if it did come down to like you or my kids, I'd do it. I'd kill you and eat your
But
ass.
I don't think about it. Even though I talked about it and said I thought about it a lot and it decided, I don't really think about it.
It's like the Drake meme. It's like, plant a garden? Nah. Eat ass? Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So tonight I've been thinking a lot about something that Sam and Sean said, where it's like, dude, lighten the fuck up. Pick a subject that's not so dark.
Oh, that thing.
Yeah.
I thought
he was talking about that
something
other
else,
thing,
too.
but never
I
mind.
was
Yeah.
like, you're really going to bring that conversation up on public?
No, we're not bringing that
I
up.
didn't think we were going to air dirty laundry like that.
I don't
We can
have
talk
dirty
about it.
laundry.
Should we just talk about
I don't
it?
have
Let's
dirty
talk about
laundry.
it. You guys wanna
The
talk about it?
audience
You know the boys, they wanna
knows
talk about it.
me
You guys
by
in
now.
QAnon?
They know that. All right, I'm
He runs
QAnon.
fucking
fuck.
4chan, dude.
No, but it was quite a challenge, actually. It took me like a week or so to even figure out what I really wanted to do. And as such, I kind of had to like parse this into 3 different sections. And so we're going to start our like this positive note episode. We're going to start it with like 2 stories that aren't really positive at all, because that's the only way that I could really put the framework into
Nice.
this whole thing.
I couldn't
And
make
so-
something happy unless it came from something bad.
Exactly.
Can't
And
have the good times without the bad times, guys.
you guys,
I'm waiting on the good times now.
I like how
Gosh.
you didn't lump me in with that because I just want to go darker and darker.
you're definitely the one that's encouraged me. That's like, do you think that Tiger King guy ate fucking anybody's asshole? And it's like, Joe, I
he
don't even know where to start
definitely
that
did.
research.
He's definitely eating lots of butt.
I imagine so, but
I'm
yeah.
sure it
Was
was in
gay?
a positive way, but
Yeah.
Or is gay.
Oh, sure.
I'm just saying, is that past tense? Like
I don't really know, man.
Oh,
No,
I don't
he's-
know where he's at.
he's extra gay now.
Extra, yeah,
Okay.
he's more gay now.
He's
Who
probably
knows?
got more husbands.
Just saying, I didn't watch that show.
I didn't either, so I don't even know what you
Yeah, I
guys are
haven't.
talking about.
So since we do this podcast in 3 parts, our first 2 parts are going to be tragic. And again, we're going to land on something a little more heartwarming for the 3rd part.
Puppies.
Damn it. All right, well, that's the podcast.
Yeah, that's where puppies
Yeah, it
came
was-
from.
Welcome to the new podcast, Puppies and Kittens.
And that's the
You
episode.
like soft fuzz.
And that's next week.
Yeah, that's next week. We're
Thank
gonna
you
talk-
for having Matt on for the podcast. That was nice.
Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Yeah, it was great to have you, Matt. Thanks for ruining it, because that was the punchline that my entire intro is going for. No, but since we are shooting the shit, I'm just gonna dive right on into this. Manifest Destiny was, and arguably is, a star. Manifest Destiny was, and arguably is, a stars in the skies way of looking at the expansion of empires. This idea was what brought white settlers over from Europe. The idea is and was simple. If one can take and hold land, they fucking owned it. This meant
Squatters' rights.
that all the land in what would later become the United States was up for grabs, but there was just a few issues that would slow European expansion.
So by like it
The-
being
the
sort
big-
of negative to begin with, you're gonna just roll
We're
plainly right
we're
into
diving.
the slaughter of the Native Americans.
One of the biggest of the factors that would slow European expansion was the greatly feared, uncivilized Native Americans.
Uncivilized.
Those savages, you mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You guys feeling good about this episode yet?
I'm feeling great. Plunge into that pit.
Ah, fucking somebody give me some alka-seltzer.
Or alcohol?
Alcohol seltzer.
So when early Americans began moving westward, they typically would slaughter and brutalize Native Americans if they couldn't get them to convert to Christianity. Even if they could convert them, this was usually a ploy to get the Native Americans to act as like friends and allies before betraying them. And as the colonies were expanding east towards the east of the Mississippi, Europeans needed more fertile land to grow their cotton, corn, wheat, barley, oats, tobacco, rice. But there was always those pesky Native Americans to deal with. And this would be known
Those
as the British problem,
those
which we'll get into in a
meddling-
few minutes.
Native Americans.
We gave them horses.
So,
Wow.
but we're broad stroking so much history tonight because it's a 3-parter with, So the British proclamation.
Yada, yada, yada.
Sam, stop.
So on and so forth, and then
Continue, and here we are today.
And here we are today. So the British Proclamation of 1763 was a proclamation which ended the French and Indian War, which was like just the name of it. It wasn't like actually them. But the French and Indian War was basically like the French and British Americans fighting over each other's like territories. Both sides of this conflict were supported by their homelands, bringing in troops and supplies and stuff like that to keep both armies robust. But it was also fought using Native Americans on both sides.
Isn't this the last of the Mohegans?
It probably is, but
When Daniel Day-Lewis has the goddamn nuts to play a Native American.
well,
No, he's not. He was adopted.
Oh, I was gonna make like
no,
a
he's a white kid raised by Native Americans.
Oh, you mean
I
a
was gonna
white
make
savior?
I was gonna make like
He was an American
He's got the
Mowgli.
nuts to play Tarzan.
I was gonna
Tom
make like a
Cruise and the Last
164th
Samurai.
joke where it's like, well, I'm 164th Cherokee. I should be at like but yeah, it's not gonna land. But basically, like the white Europeans from the French and British colonies had been like moving against each other in the Northeast, like near the Great Lakes, and using Native Americans and like their knowledge, they were trying to kind of outmaneuver each other. So after, I believe what would be called the 7 Years' War, this proclamation was put into place to forbid any settlements on native lands, and native lands at the time were like anything west of Appalachia. And this proclamation also ordered the immediate withdrawal of all settlers from the area. And this was a good attempt to keep like native lands to their respective people, but white people obviously just were never satisfied.
You also just gotta think of the political climate, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there are 5 different European governments vying for chunks of North America and South America at this point. And, like, the fucking English and the French are really going at it in, like, on the northeast up in, like, New England and Canada and stuff. Fuck, I forgot what I was saying. Oh, the political climate. So there's only so many white people, regardless of whose side you're on, compared to the 100 million Native Americans that were on the continent or whatever it is.
Yeah,
like,
approximately.
And the further west you went, like, the more warlike they became, and the more mobile they were just by nature. So, like, you just sort of now you're like guerrilla warfare all the way.
Well,
like,
and I also think a part of that played into it was that, like, part of the expansion, like, there was obviously people coming up from, like, Mexico and stuff like that, but when you got towards, like, the northeast and, like, where, like, Wisconsin is now, and like anywhere between that and, like, the northeast of the United States, the southeast part of Canada, white people were just, like, not really that heard of. Like, maybe they were seen in passing, but
they were all fur trappers and stuff. Like,
yeah, it was.
The reason you could get all the way to Wisconsin area was because of the St. Lawrence Seaway that goes into Lake Erie, the first Great Lake, the most northeasternly Great Lake.
Yeah.
And from there you can, move by boat. You can move a lot of stuff. So, it's just initially it's like the Hudson, Mohawk, and St. Lawrence rivers, like, allowed trappers and white people to settle a little further in from the coast.
Yeah.
In that area, but it was a lot of just, like, not dudes you wanted to cross in a fucking alley. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like where things are so far in the story. And like, even still, even though like people were interacting with, like, the natives and stuff, like the typical white Europeans that were coming to the United States, to them, these natives were terrifying, and they were just, like, super resented by European immigrants. Again, I kind of talked about the Christian ideals and stuff like that, which we'll get into. But white people looked upon these, like, these new, as they called them, red people, as, like, a strange and unfamiliar group with, like, weird customs, and, like, they were foreign and unusual
and huge and strong.
Yeah, and and these natives were living on
they ate corn.
Yeah,
they were wheat. So
they were probably the first corn-fed boys. Yeah. And
for sure.
And so these natives were also living on land that white Europeans saw as their own, and it was land that they deserved. I mean, after all, why would the natives not use this land to create industry?
Oh, you mean white privilege been around for a lot longer than just the 2000s?
Probably not. Probably not. But
it wasn't white privilege before; it was manifest destiny.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we're talking about.
But the simple mentality at the time was that these people, that these tribes were savages, and most of them without the ability to become more European. These lands that these settlers saw as they touched their feet onto the New World were just huge swaths of fertile land that one could use to create a farm and thus find their own source of fortune. But nobody was using them, according to these white people. So a huge amount of Europeans...
That's just a fucking lie.
I know.
That's just a lie, dude.
So,
like, you go to the Schoharie, like, river valley in central New York, and all you have to do is wait for it to rain, and you will find arrowheads and broken stone tool implements, like, within a half an hour of looking in the fields after they plow.
Yeah, but, like, white Europeans didn't really see it like that. And in fact, a huge amount of these Europeans at the time posed, quote, the native problem. Which we've kind of talked about a lot, where it's like, quote, demographic problem.
We literally have a story about how natives taught white people to farm.
Yeah. But the problem itself was kind of a twofold way of looking at these so-called
and then we killed
uncivilized peoples. They could integrate they could integrate them into the new American custom, teaching them to read, write, and most importantly, worship God. And if they could get these dang pesky Native Americans to just learn European customs, industry, and economic practices, the natives may have understood the perceived necessity that was colonial expansion. If they could understand the idea of owning land, having property, and utilizing it for economic benefit, the natives would give their land over to the Europeans, or at the very least, assimilate into their economic ways of viewing land, people, and industry at large. The Europeans also wanted to civilize these savages by converting them to Christian beliefs. And so it was basically the Indian question at the time was like, can we convert them? Because the alternative part of that question was, if they couldn't civilize these darker-skinned people, they could just slaughter them and bury their traditions forever in the heavy history that was the Western expansion into the New World.
I think it's very amusing that a bunch of Europeans came to America and was like, you guys going to talk like us, you're going to dress like us and act like us, and now their descendants are like, if you're coming to America, you're going to talk like us, you're going to act like us.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, the hypocrisy amongst racist, bigoted people is often deep.
It's astounding.
Deep and wide, like the Mississippi. It's like an Amazon river of hypocrisy.
This genocide, as it would later become, spoilers, guys, would allow more people to create industry, profits, and business. So I'm going to quote from recordsofrights.org here. Quote, Indian reservations were interfering with Western expansion, and many Americans felt that the only solution to the Indian problem was assimilation of Native Americans into Euro-American society. The government, which is capitalized, set a dramatic new policy under the Dawes Act, dissolving tribal ownership of reservations into individual allotments for Native American ownership. The policy was designed to force assimilation by separating Native Americans from their tribal affiliations and turning them into farmers and eventually American citizens. Many Native Americans resisted farming because it conflicted with their traditional way of life. Most Native Americans also did not become citizens through the Dawes Act. However, the policy was immensely successful at opening up the West, divesting tribes of 2/3 of all remaining reservation lands, which is slightly after what we're about to get into, but it's pretty fucking darn. So, the southeastern U.S. had quite a few native tribes that embraced, more or less, the ideals of the Europeans. The Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, Creek, and Cherokee people became a part of the colonial expansion and were given the title of the, quote, 5 civilized tribes. The 5 civilized tribes lived on what is now...
They're the 5 good ones.
It's like...
Look, Joe, they figured it out.
Mind you, this was the 18, right before the 1830s. Sam is so angry. This is right before the 1830s, so the wokest man on the planet was still racist as shit to everybody else on the planet. That's just how it worked at this time. And so these 5 civilized tribes lived on now what are parts of Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee. And that land was, to European settlers, ripe for the picking. Its value rose as the years passed, and with more and more Europeans coming into the United States, the U.S. had to find a way to boost economic development, find more land for people to settle, and civilize or eliminate the natives as they expanded out west.
And you're talking about after the Dawes Act. I just looked. That's 1887.
That's
so. There's a bit of there's almost.
And this is way
over
before
100-year jump between the French and Indian War, which happens 10 years before the American Revolution, and the Dawes Act.
Yeah,
there's over 100 years.
Yeah, and it's still a thing that's going on.
A century plus of slaughter and fucking pathological warfare.
Yeah. And so tonight we're going to be talking from the 1829s to the 1852s for both of these stories before we get to our third segment. And so I'm going to jump around a little bit, but all of this stuff that I'm about to talk about was literally in between the Dawes Act and like the beginning of this story, and it just really shows that like not really much had changed in between all this stuff. And yeah, so a booming commodity at the time was like obviously cotton. Cotton was one of the most luxurious commodities at the time, and it was used to create fabrics and clothes, and was also the top contributor to African American suffering, along with sugar and tobacco. The reason I brought that in is because we have to understand that a lot of fucking people are suffering right now. I just wanted to highlight that because, white people suck.
Because we're 5 white guys talking about all of this.
Fair. Yeah, that's a fair enough
Whoa.
observation.
Marcus is here. He just doesn't have a microphone, okay?
So
Fucking diversity
Which might
hire.
just like add to the point
bud.
here.
So all
He's
of
not
the
allowed to have one.
Hey.
So all of the Europeans spilling into the New World, and at this time there was a absolute shitload of them, had come there seeking their chance at a better life. They wanted to come to the American colonies and make their fortunes. As the white Europeans continued to arrive in droves, they began eyeing native lands as places they could conquer. Ignoring how civilized, quote unquote, the southeastern tribes were, the white colonists vied for their land, and the land became more and more valuable as more and more people poured into the New World. In an effort to push these natives from their land, Europeans began looting, because, that's just what we did. Spoilers, guys. Hope you weren't hoping for a...
God said we could have it.
What?
Man
Y'all
of
love-
this destiny.
Y'all love Satan, so we get all your loot. So History.com explains a little bit about what they were doing. They, the white people, wanted land, and they would do almost anything to get it. They stole livestock, burned and looted houses and towns, committed mass murder, and squatted on land that did not belong to them. So that was one of the interesting things I learned about like the 7 Years' War, is that they're like essentially there was a lot of people like kind of encroaching onto Native American lands, and so the reason they got involved was because they were like, yeah, we'll fight with you guys as long as you get the fuck out of here.
Well, I mean, yeah. Ever since the Mayflower landed, white people have been making deals that they go back on.
That's going to be a reoccurring thing.
The agreement for the use of the island of Manhattan with, I forget the tribe's name, and it was basically just like a box of beads. And the white people were under the assumption that they just purchased this fucking island. And the Native Americans were under the assumption that they had gotten a gift to also use the island because all of this is everyone's.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, you just like these two completely different ideologies, and one's, got less scruples.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one is more insidious and one has scruples.
You got to read the fine print on those contracts. That's what it is.
So there were even attempts to legislate the driving of Americans from the Native Americans rather, from their lands in the South. In 1830, though, and Jackson was like kind of on their side, but he was also kind of a gigantic piece of shit. So like, I'm just gonna stay in the favor of he's a piece of shit, and that's where I'm gonna write from here.
Was he a president?
He definitely was.
So
yeah. So,
So
in
95% chance he's guilty of war crimes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we'll get to that.
No, my buddy Matt Wallace, my other buddy Matt Wallace.
Jesus.
Oh, weird.
He always says, you can't be the president without being a fucking criminal.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So in 1830, Andrew Jackson created the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
No fancy name on that
Nope,
one.
there's no...
No, they didn't butter
No,
it up
legislation back in the day was pretty clear cut.
Yeah.
They were like, this is what it does. It was
Like,
2
is that a
pages
wig?
long.
Yes, it is. And
It probably
this is
came
what
to the
this
floor
means.
as the Kill All the Indians Act, and they're like, maybe that's a little harsh. Let's go with Indian removal.
Yeah, and there were like some laws beforehand that like some laws they basically limited or the Indian Removal Act, basically it limited and outright removed the sovereignty and rights that the natives held over their own land. So not only was there like this physical push from like white European settlers to like kick people out of their land with like physically and illegally
Immorally?
illegal physical alteration interactions rather. there was also like a legislative push that removed their ability to just legally retaliate. And so Andrew Jackson, who in one of the articles I was reading was quoted as being like kind of friendly towards the Native Americans, passed that act. So it was like,
Yeah, by friendly, he was unwilling to like send the cavalry
exactly.
to go just run the whole tribe into the ground and throw the babies in the fucking water. Like,
Yeah, he was
because they did that shit too.
Yeah, and basically he was like, look, if we legislate it, what we can do is legally take them from this land. And, we'll kind of get into some of this here in a little bit, but essentially what they were doing was they were trying to be like, everything west of the Mississippi is where you guys go. And Andrew Jackson with the Indian Removal Act kind of like started that whole process where like at the time it was extremely woke. Like it was like, oh, we're not just going to go and murder all these fucking brown people and take their land. It was like, no. What we're going to do is we're going to abuse them for 1,200 miles and send them on their fucking way. So
Squeeze them out through
so
law.
Since these guys didn't have like a legal ability to retaliate, there was like a resistance from
because
them.
they didn't know what legality was.
They
Right.
don't follow those
Well,
laws.
Like, but these are the rules and the laws, and they're like, "What's that?"
Well, no. Again, there was these like 5 quote civilized tribes that they were dealing with,
we're
and these were the
getting
tribes
along.
that they were trying to push out of their lands. And so
Native Americans had agreements and stuff. They had
Yeah.
rules that
No,
they
I get
lived
that,
by.
There was
but I'm
treaty
like,
and
not-
stuff. Yeah.
But I just feel like
They didn't have like a democracy style
No,
law
right,
system.
it's-
You know what I mean? Where
well,
they're like,
let's
"That's
be
punishable by
honest.
law," and they're like,
laws are basically just used to control people. They're not really like enforcing like too much morality these days. It's more about like power and control to the
That's
centralized
what they always
government.
were. Yeah.
yeah, and regardless of what
And
what-
I love the government.
regardless of what they were like, what we have to understand at this point of the story is that like these savage, uncivilized Native Americans, they actually had gotten to the point where they were a part of these like 5 quote civilized tribes to such a point that they were resistant of this push. In fact, the Cherokee people had created a newspaper called the Cherokee Phoenix. And it was to be a publication for their views and ideas as they lobbied for Congress. Their petition had 15,000 signatures to keep Congress from forcing their removal. The case moved all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1932, the United States Supreme Court saw the court case of Worcester versus Georgia, which affirmed the sovereign rights of Native Americans. However,
when was this case submitted?
I'm sure it was probably
You're like-
2 years beforehand.
Oh, okay. I was like, you said 1932.
no,
and I
I'm
thought
sorry.
we
I was
were.
1832.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and I was just,
right,
I was
right.
like, man, this thing they pushed back did that law thing for like a
100
while.
years,
Yeah.
yeah.
They were like,
And
damn,
also-
we're gonna get to it now.
And also, people who are listening, I've got this thing called dyscalculia where I fuck up numbers pretty fucking often. Like I'm dyslexic but with numbers, so it's gonna be a thing that happens.
But
a lot.
1832 is
Yeah,
when they started.
1832. So
Turn
Okay, yeah.
yeah. And so the Worcester versus Georgia kind of affirmed the sovereign rights of Native Americans and the ownership they had over their land. However, there was no one to really enforce the laws, which led Andrew Jackson, who had waged war against the Creek Indians in Georgia and Alabama, and the Seminoles in Florida, and was the Army general. This led him to just ignore the Supreme Court decision. And he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, well, if no one's going to actually support and enforce these laws, including me, whose job it is to support and enforce these laws, then fuck them. And like that, the southern states were allowed to just start using their term, securing territories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson, ally of the Native Americans.
And then they peacefully
Yeah,
moved
don't
them
give me no
out,
more
and then
50s.
everyone lived happily ever after, right?
They were definitely peacefully removed, and that's where
Everyone got money from it, and
Yep,
reparations, and then they're like,
So the federal government at the behest of
Reparations.
Jackson and his Indian Removal Act were given the power to
5 acres and a good mule.
exchange. So these guys were given the power to exchange native lands east of the Mississippi and move them into areas west of the Mississippi in what was like the newly minted Louisiana Purchase territory. They weren't legally allowed to coerce or force any natives from their lands, But this was altogether ignored.
Cops aren't legally allowed to shoot unarmed people, but they do that all the time too.
Every day.
Plus, it's also, there's not forensic analysts. Nobody understands how people die, disease. I'm pretty sure cells haven't been discovered at this time. Diseases, poison, these kinds of things are just basically unknown.
1832, we knew what cells were. In 1832, we knew what a cell was. We had microscopes.
Okay,
already,
perfect.
You know
Yeah,
what I
well,
mean?
germology then.
3 people did.
Yeah.
The normal person did it.
So
no.
In the late part of 1931, as winter was arriving, and I'm going to quote again from history.com, quote, "The Choctaw became the first nation to be expelled from its land altogether." So this was the first of many trail of tears. Thousands of men, women, and children were forced to move from, quote, Indian territory on foot and in chains. On February 25th, 1932, George W.
1832.
Harkins, 1832, thank you. George W. Harkins, chief of the Choctaw tribe, wrote an open letter to the American people, in part stating, and I encourage you guys to look this up, quote, "We go forth sorrowful, knowing that wrong has been done. Will you extend to us your sympathizing regards until all traces of disagreeable oppositions are obliterated, and we again shall have confidence in the professions of our white brethren. Here's the land of our progenitors, and here are their bones. They left them as a sacred deposit, and we have been compelled to venerate its trust. It is dear to us, yet we cannot stay. My people are dear to me. With them I must go. Could I stay and forget them and leave them to struggle alone, unaided, unfriended, and forgotten by our great father? I should then be unworthy the name of Choctaw, and be a disgrace to my blood. I must go with them. My destiny is cast among the Choctaw people. If they suffer, so will I. If they prosper, then I will rejoice. Let me ask again you to regard us with feelings of kindness." But spoilers, it didn't really stop there.
Oh, and they call that guy uncivilized.
Yeah. In 1836, the Creeks were pushed from their land, and from the 15,000 that had left, 3,500 of them did not make it to what is modern-day Oklahoma. The Cherokee people were torn when, in 1835, a self-appointed group negotiated what's known as the Treaty of New Echota, which granted them $5 million in, quote, relocation assistance in compensation for lost property. And these people were not given jurisdiction by the Choctaw Nation, by the way. As the federal government dusted off their hands and patted themselves on the back for a job well done, the Cherokee people were at a loss. The representatives that had negotiated the treaty weren't officials of the tribal government, nor had they represented the will of the Cherokee people. In fact, the representatives had no right to negotiate the terms. The Cherokee Nation's principal chief, John Ross at the time, collected nearly 16,000 signatures on his petition of the treaty, but Congress went ahead anyway. It was in 1838 that Martin Van Buren, president at the time, sent a general and 7,000 soldiers to Georgia to expedite the removal of Native Americans.
Yeah, Van Buren was a gigantic piece of shit.
And
Call in the National Guard.
He makes Jackson look good.
No, because the Van Burens
I don't know
are
anything
like,
about 'em, yeah.
that's some old money, evil fucking skull and bones shit. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Who keeps the aliens under wraps? We do. We do.
So the troops forced the Native Americans under threat of bayonets and bullets
Nice guy.
into stockades and began to march towards Indian territory. All the while, the soldiers plundered their homes and stole their belongings. In the 12,000 miles
their
between
women,
Georgia
killed
and
their
the
children.
Indian territories, 5,000 Cherokees died from whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, and starvation. From History.com, quote, "By 1840, tens of thousands of Native Americans had been driven off of their land in the southeastern states and forced to move across the Mississippi to Indian territory. The federal government promised that their new land would remain unmolested forever, but as the line of white settlement pushed westward, their quotes, Indian country shrank and shrank. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state and the Indian territory was gone for good." It was in 1847, 7 years after that, that the Choctaw Nation had gotten word about another disaster from nearly halfway across the world. And we're going to end this here. I'm going to go ahead and go to break.
It's break time.
Break time! You guys feeling good? Because the next part's not going to get lighter.
Oh, I'm loving it.
I'm
All right.
so
I
happy
thought
right
we were gonna.
now.
Yeah.
I'm the happiest boy in the whole wide world.
Hell yeah. Well, here we go. We're going to break.
Manifest destiny.
Did you regretfully forget to study martial arts? Are you a weakling? Are you scared? Do you lack courage? Are you just down on your luck, feeling blue? Just want a little pep in your step or a smile on your face? Well, come down to Karate Chop Emporium. We got everything you need to get back on your feet and feel good. Defeat your nemesis. We got karate chops, fists, kicks, kick shots, headbutts. We got a guy down here who'll break a brick for you. It's freaking awesome. Ow! Come down to Karate Chop Emporium at 357 Q Street.
It's not a strip mall.
Street. Or a strip club.
And welcome back to KWPZ 106.7 FM.
Brick oven rock and roll with Cheesy Papa and Skeeter.
I'm here taking hot, sweet, sexy requests on music.
And I'm here taking your hot pizza request for delivery. The ovens are fired up. We are ready to make pie.
And we are about to kick ourselves into a nice 30-minute rock block. But first,
Let's go to caller one.
Caller number
With
one.
a pizza order. What do you want?
Hey! I'm Johnny. I'm from the west side of Chicago. I'm just
Cool,
sitting
Johnny.
here rocking out, just trying to get a little pizza.
Nice. What's your order, bud?
I want a deep dish, like Chicago style pepperoni pizza with full slices. I don't want you taking like the slice out like you did last time.
Oh, yeah, we got rid of that guy who's, like the delivery guy was eating the one slice. Yeah, it was a real issue. He had,
Daniel
OCD or something.
Daniel had a really bad problem with kleptomania, but what we do have is a bona fide, badass new delivery driver by the name of Chris. Chris, how are you feeling tonight?
Ooh, I'm feeling real good tonight. I'm glad I'm going to be going out to Chicago.
You ready to take this dude's pizza out to him in like
I am.
20, 25 minutes?
Ooh, I'm so ready when it's so hot.
What do you want to hear on the way?
You know what I want to hear? I want to hear a little bit of Mississippi heat. Because I can feel that Chicago deep dish is going to be real hot when it comes out the oven.
Heat, some of that Chicago blues, baby.
Ooh, yeah. But no, when I get halfway across that toll bridge, what I want to hear is a little bit of Smashing Pumpkins for that little toll money I got to put
Well,
in
we
there.
got 4 minutes of Mississippi heat for you, baby, for that Chicago blues satiation. And then we're also going to kick it off with a little bit of them rock and roll bands. But until
Caller,
then-
are you paying with cash or credit card?
PayPal.
Oh, yeah. All right, we'll kick you over to our operator.
Yeah, and until then, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and kick into this sweet half an hour rock block. This has been Skeeter.
And Cheesy Papa, get ready for some whiny lyrics and whining guitar.
Woo!
That's definitely the same dude.
The makers of the Lasso Hammer are happy to introduce you to our new product, the Rugged Lasso Hammer.
With a steel reinforced rope and a stainless steel lead infused hammerhead.
Any man who knows his way around a construction site is going to use one of these.
With high tensile strength and an aerodynamic design.
It's fun for the whole family, even the kids. And you bring it to a construction site, you're going to really nail it.
The Rugged Lasso Hammer.
Swing it,
Nail it.
Rugged
Lasso Hammer.
This episode of Black Sheep and Bad Apples was brought to you by Fourth Corner Studios, providing audio recording and editing services to the Trinity County area.
We are back. This is Black Sheep and Bad Apples. I'm your host, Lauren O'Brien. And before we continue into our next very dark segment, Matt, I believe you had something you wanted to address.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight how the Europeans were so efficiently able to remove the Native Americans through their use of religion by convincing all the people that the natives were savages and heathens and animals. It's the same dehumanizing language that we've seen all throughout history.
Yeah, that's why, like, the assimilation thing that I was kind of talking about with, like, the, quote, Indian problem that they had. Their issue is, like, with assimilation, but assimilation wouldn't stop them from doing what they were going to do.
And kicking them out of their lands so that we could take their lands wasn't enough either, because if you look like here in California and on the West Coast and Oregon, it doesn't get talked about as much as the Trail of Tears. But man, we were killing Indians up here up until the World War II, 1940s. Because I remember I went to the library in Garberville years ago, and I was looking at old newspapers from the teens and the 20s and the 30s. And I remember the craziest thing is like 1941 or 42, there was a newspaper advertisement for a vacation package to Humboldt County to come shoot your own Indian. I saw this with my own fucking eyes. And that was the 1940s. We're talking about like the 1830s and 1820s when they're doing the Trail of Tears. Like they were just slaughtering Native Americans on the West Coast all the way into the 1900s because it had been taught to generations passed down that the natives are not people.
What's crazy about that is we did a podcast last episode about like workers' rights and like the American Auto workers or whatever they were called, the union that worked in Chicago that did a bunch of this shit. They ended up marching with Martin Luther King, and this was all during the same time. This was like 1930s, 1940s, and what they were doing was
those were the 1960s. Martin Luther King.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is the movement was from like the 1940. It was 1932 or 29 or something like that through like the 50s. When we kind of talked about how some of these factory workers were now able to buy the cars that they were working on to make because of these people who were striking. And these same people, like during the 40s and 50s, these people striking for better wages. It didn't matter what color your skin or what gender you were. It didn't matter any of this stuff. That they were honestly working for that stuff. And so it's crazy to see like the variations between like this kind of rural California and like what was going on in cities like Chicago and places like that. It's
all the union posters of like the black and the white, two strong arms.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Grabbing like giving each other a pound basically.
If you want to make a change, you got to unite the working class.
Yeah,
and the way they keep the working class from running things is disintegrating us and
divide and conquer.
Dividing us into saying, like if you can make the poorest white person think he's still better than any black person, then they've done their job as far as dividing the working class.
So we are going to actually talk a little bit about classism in our next segment. It's sometimes called the Great Hunger, the Great Famine, but most people are going to recognize it better as like the Irish Potato Famine.
Oh, you mean I wish it was a little... Oh, never mind. I was trying to...
You were going to...
Really insulting, but...
Yeah. You want to talk about the dirty potato people?
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
And like 90% of us are Irish in this room.
I'm 90% Irish.
I don't know.
I'm just saying, there's 6 of you, 6 of us, and 4 of y'all little ginger bitches is from Ireland.
All right, 80%, whatever. No, I'm bad at math. Anyway, between 1845 and 1849, and actually the numbers extend sometimes into 1845, so we're going to have a little bit of discrepancy in that regard. But between 1845 and 1852, we'll say, the Irish suffered through some of the most difficult circumstances that one would have to face. While the factors that contributed most was like the potato famine. No, hear me out.
Oh, the factors. Poor fucking Irish.
The poor Irish people. And
one
I'm not saying
group you
this
can
because
still
my
make
last
fun
name's
of.
O'Brien and I'm biased. Like I'm saying, like, this is another key feature in what's going to be a positive story tonight, guys. So stay focused. So while the factor that contributed the most, rather, was a potato blight, there were like very significant other key features at the time that were causing such great suffering during the Irish potato famine. The penal laws of the 16th and 17th century were a series of laws that were passed by Britain, and it was basically meant to punish Roman Catholics and strip them of civil liberties, and this extended all the way over to just regular Catholics. And so when they like kind of took over Ireland, we'll get into it a little bit. These guys
regular Catholic. It also extended to any poor person.
It definitely extended to any
That's
poor
where
person.
debtors' prisons comes from.
Yeah. So they instituted the domination of let's try that again. The
Fix your mouth, bro.
Edit.
The institution and
Edit point.
Break.
edit point. They instituted the domination of Protestantism in Britain, but especially in the mostly Catholic Ireland. The laws allowed for fines and punishments for the practice of Catholic worship. These punishments were sometimes severe, sometimes even resulting in death. The Encyclopedia Britannica also describes this, quote, "Other laws barred Catholics from voting, holding public office, owning land, bringing religious items from Rome into Britain, publishing or selling Catholic primers, or teaching." So, after the British took control of Ireland, they're basically like, nah, Catholicism ain't a thing over here. And if you want to be Catholic, you're gonna be poor.
And let's not forget that the Catholic Church came into Ireland and did the same basic thing to remove all the Druid and Celtic traditions of the indigenous people there.
Yeah, and
Burn down castles, which you know how hard it is to burn down a fucking castle?
We're gonna set this rock on fire.
You'd be surprised how much of a castle is actually held up by wood. Like, you think you can stack stone that high without, like, bracing it on the inside? You're wrong, and all that bracing's wood, so...
Now,
you burn the
All
inside
right,
of a
let's
castle,
go burn some castles then.
it'll
man. I don't know
collapse.
what
I
you're
promise
saying
you
here,
it'll
man.
fall down, bro.
time for me to pop smoke.
If you want to see what a building looks like that you can't burn down, I'd look to the Egyptians or the Mayans.
Because
Or
it's
the
still here.
Aztecs.
Or the geodesic domes.
Or the geodesic dome. That's not a... You ever seen a stone
Cave dwellings.
geodesic dome? Hey, you guys want to be in my new band?
A stone geodesic
Yeah, because
dome.
they build them things down in Paris, Texas.
Paris, Texas. Now, getting back on
Perry,
track.
Texas.
Since Catholics
Oh,
didn't have the
Perry.
right to own property, a common practice in Ireland was what's referred to as tenant farming. Tenant farming was a way that landowners, without contributing anything themselves, could hold property and make a profit off of it. Summarize the landowner, and in this case, a very British person who owned just the majority of Ireland at the time.
Some lord.
Would sometimes give money to what would be termed as a middleman. The middleman would pay dues on large portions of farmland and then subdivide these plots into smaller farms where he could put more and more tenants. So essentially, if the landowner only wanted X amount and you got X times 64 because you broke this little land part, this X land piece part into 64 pieces, you can make a shitload of money as a middleman. So, on the same land the tenants were farming for their food, the tenants would also have to pay rent for their house. And so they, basically would grow as much crops as they could. And in the case of like a lot of cereal grains and stuff, which I don't get into in my script itself, in the case of cereal crops, they were the most profitable, but they couldn't really afford to keep any because it was so expensive to buy. But these middlemen would oversee the farms, ensuring the correct crop production and collect rent, which was due in various forms of commodities, like
They're landlords.
Yeah.
like
In America, we call that farming the shares.
yeah, basically. So like these commodities that these
Sharecropping.
guys would collect were
Sharecroppers.
as you were saying, like part of the crop or actual money, and most oftentimes it was like a combination of the two. This meant that poor Catholic Irish people, specifically, who couldn't buy property, were subject to becoming the equivalent of indentured workers.
You could just
Slaves.
say Irish people. Poor Catholic Irish
So
people is
basically,
like an ATM machine.
the lords came through, and they said you can't have your own land, but you can work your own land for us. And if your crop doesn't come through, you're going to prison.
Not even prison. They would most oftentimes kick them out, and then much like they did with a lot of other places at this time, they would just take all their shit. Like sometimes you would be kicked out of your house with like a trunk full of your clothes.
This also happened. This happened in New York, and I want to say it was a Van Buren, the farmer barons.
and this is happening during that
the
that
robber
time.
barons of New York and stuff.
Exactly.
There was right by where I grew up, 20 minutes away, was like the central fucking point of like this farmers uprising where like
And they were kind of like copycatting off of what like
it's the same time period though.
yeah, exactly.
That's what I mean. It's like the same time period. This was happening all over the world, but like a lot in fucking Ireland.
yeah,
And in
this-
Ireland's case, they wouldn't even take your shit. They would put a big beam in between two mule teams and just smash your house down.
Yeah.
Because the same dehumanizing rhetoric that made these, Scotch and Anglo Ulstermen think that Irish Catholics weren't people.
Yeah. And it's...
And when you see those people dying of famine, green grass stains around their mouth, lying out in the field all dead, they don't really look like people.
We're going to get into some of that. So,
Very visual picture you put in front of me, man.
so in normal times, it would have been difficult enough to grow like crops and make enough money to provide full rent and a majority of all the food and like a majority of all the food and money that was like grown and created by the poor Irish Catholic people was just shipped outside of Ireland to be like sold for a higher profit in case the commodities. And
that went to the crown.
Yeah, exactly. And more importantly, in this case, it went to the land barons of the time who owned a shitload of Irish land, and most of these people never stepped foot on any of these properties throughout their lives.
No.
That's why the middlemen were so important. And this kind of meant that all the food grown by Irish tenants in Ireland was basically unavailable for purchase just due to how expensive it was and how poor they were. So, like, they would grow
This is no
rice and
different than the
barley.
company store.
Exactly.
This is the same setup as the fucking coal mines were doing with their miners. Only these aren't miners; they're farmers. So
And this is a whole fucking century
their
later,
rent,
damn
they
near.
can't grow enough food to pay their rent. So how could they keep any for themselves?
Yeah.
Right? They could keep their vegetables, but we're talking about nobody had salt.
Interestingly, one of the key components to the potato famine was the rise of demand for beef in England. And they turned a lot of the land in Ireland that was supposed to be for potatoes and other crops into grazing land.
Yeah.
It takes a lot more land to graze cattle than it does to grow crops.
Yeah, and I don't know if I put this in my script, so we might
Same
come
thing
back
like the
to it.
Amazon.
Yeah, we might
Right.
come back to
Burn
this
down
point,
the
but
fucking rainforest.
during the potato famine that happened in Ireland, it wasn't for a lack of food that was being grown in Ireland. It was for a lack of wages to afford that food. And
But
since
do
the
you-
British
that-
Empire
you hear
had
how
control,
crazy that is.
since
These were
the-
farmers
since the-
that grow the food.
since
Like
the-
they couldn't
since
eat
the
their
British
own food.
Empire
That's
had
insane.
control over the entire thing. Basically, the British Empire was just trying to make as big of a profit as it could by pulling as much resources out of Ireland as they could. And we'll see here in a little bit that they actually just blamed the Irish people for being fucking lazy for the.
Well, they thought
entire
that
thing.
there was something genetically wrong with them.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
mean, that's what they purport. That's what they purported. That's the same story the Nazis told. It's the same story that everybody who's ever enslaved anyone
Right.
else is
That's
told
how you get
about
poor
the people that they
Protestants to
enslaved.
shit on poor Catholics.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So
you get rednecks to fucking be angry at people from the inner city, and
Yeah.
vice versa.
And because these Irish tenants spent so much time farming food that they couldn't afford, they also grew potatoes on smaller patches of land. In a good year, one could expect a small plot of land to bring in enough food for the year with the first harvest, and if luck allowed, you could have your second smaller harvest be turned into coin. Nearly half of all Irish people, in particular the rural poor, had come to depend almost exclusively on the potato by the 1840s. And it had been introduced, well, we're going to get into that actually. A big issue with this situation, however, was how heavily the Irish depended on just one or perhaps two types of potato. Because of their reliance upon this one particular type of potato, which is all that we can categorically say that was there. There might have been two.
Monocropping.
Yeah.
Monocropping.
This particular type of potato, the Irish lumper, its genetic diversity.
I'm starting to call
Oh,
potatoes that
pass
from
me
now
two
on.
of the Irish lumpers. I'm gonna fry them up real quick.
It sounds like a shot
the
of
cute
whiskey
little
with
Irish
like potato
lumper.
shavings in it.
Yeah, give me two Irish lumpers, and it's just a shot of whiskey, and then the barkeep hits you with a fucking pin.
And yeah, no, it's two French fries and a shot of whiskey.
I got an Irish lumper.
No, but since they were only growing this one variety of
Patent.
potato, genetic diversity was really poor. And this meant when Phytophthora infestans is the name of it, began running through Ireland, the first year, nearly half of all potatoes during the potato famine were infected with it. Now, Phytophthora infestans is a water mold that causes what's called blight potato or potato blight. There was air quotes for those who aren't here in the studio. And it can affect tomatoes and potatoes, apparently. Very
They're both
interesting.
nightshades.
Yeah.
And it could take place after they'd already
tobacco.
been harvested and stored.
Yep.
All your stores could go bad.
Yep. So the Encyclopedia Britannica says, quote, says that it, quote, arrived accidentally, which I don't get, from North America. In that same year, Ireland had an unusually cool, moist weather in which the blight thrived. So it was really wet, and this water mold loves wet.
Like any fungus, really. Not a lot of funguses that love like dry, arid conditions.
yeah.
I consider that if it's called a water mold,
Right,
it likes
yeah.
moisture.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
So about half of 1845's potato crop was ruined by the mold, including the stuff that had already been stored. Thank you, Matt, for bringing that up, because I did not
'cause
script
the
that and would have forgotten.
Yeah, but the potato's still alive. That's the thing. If they had dried the potato out, it wouldn't have been affected by the blight. But you're storing the potato
In a root cellar.
in a root cellar.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
This
still
is how
alive. It's
Pringles
literally
were
still
made.
alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was tennis
If
balls.
they had like cooked it and baked it into easy, like 5-minute mashed potato or something, it would have
It would have been all
stored.
right.
It would have,
Yeah.
yeah.
So again, about half of 1845's crop, the start of the famine, was ruined by the mold. And between the years of 1846 and 49, again, some people saying 52, about 3/4 of these crops were ruined. And this was a huge deal because, as we've discussed, the Irish depended on these tuberous plants to provide sustenance in two ways: food and, when sold, rent. So when the crops began failing, people began starving. This was made all the worse for the lowest tier of the social hierarchy, the landless laborers, many of whom could only afford to
Lambless?
Landless.
Landless, oh.
Landless laborers. Many of these people could only afford to live by offering their help to another farmer, often paying for rent and food with their labor. So when the harvests failed, there was no work to be had, and without their ability to work, they had nowhere to live.
Crop
nothing
flop.
to eat.
Ain't nobody getting paid.
Yeah.
We all know that story.
So they send their kids off to the city, like Dublin, to live in the slums and try to get whatever kind of work they can.
We're gonna
or
touch on
steal from
pockets.
people.
We're gonna touch on a little bit of that kind of bullshit too. 'cause
Oliver
it's-
Twist.
They got.
Yeah, I was going to say, hence the
Yeah.
Oliver Twist. Yeah.
I got really depressed while doing both of these stories, guys. So I hope the third act really fucking brings
Please,
it back around.
can I have some more?
Oh, I thought you were going to say that was the third act and we figured it out. You're like, this is where Oliver Twist came from.
So I'm going to quote from history.com again here. Quote, when the crops began failing in 1845 as a result of P. infestans infection, Irish leaders in Dublin petitioned Queen Victoria in the Parliament to act. And initially they did, repealing the so-called, quote, corn laws and their tariffs on grain, which made food such as corn and bread prohibitively expensive. Still, these changes failed to offset the growing problem of the potato blight, with many tenant farmers unable to produce sufficient food for their own consumption, and costs of other supplies rising. Thousands died from starvation, and hundreds of thousands more from disease caused by malnutrition. So even though other foods had been made slightly more affordable, there was still nowhere to work.
It's too little too late, though. That's the thing. It's
Exactly.
like you're already in this famine. There's already a food shortage, and food fucking, I don't know off the top of my head how long it takes wheat to ripen and mature or rice to ripen and mature, but it sure as shit don't take 2 weeks.
Well, and
You
for
know
the
what I
record,
mean? It's like
corn
months.
the corn laws brought in a shitload of Indian corn at the time, which is what it was called. And when the people ground it, they only had grinders for like wheat and barley and stuff like that. And so when people would actually eat this corn, a lot of people, it would actually scrape their small and large intestines and cause them to bleed out when they ate this,
Like
especially elderly
Crohn's-
and younger
Crohn's
people.
disease
Yeah,
is
exactly.
basically what they were-
And
they were
Crohn's
saying.
disease was partially contributory to like starving.
Well,
you know?
one of the main problems with Crohn's disease is a fucking inability to absorb nutrition.
Yeah.
Because your intestines are full of little infections. They're not, like the places where the infection has occurred
Let's not
isn't absorbing.
let's not
nutrients.
forget religion's part in this as well.
It is. It's a very much a part of it.
Because
Sure, dude.
Which we're gonna get to.
the Irish Catholic Church demonized sex to where it's only for procreation, and so these poor crappie families were having like 8 and 12 kids, and they couldn't afford
Define
to feed
crappie
them.
for the audience.
A crappie? Oh, you know, it's like in America, it's a sharecropper. In Ireland, it's a poor Irish person that
Okay.
works the crops.
Yep, crappie. Perfect. Yeah, and
Also a derogatory term.
We
yeah,
should start calling
so-
people
Also a
around
type
here
of fish.
crappies. It really works.
Instead of like a trimmigrant.
Yeah, and so no work meant no pay, and no pay meant no food. It was so bad.
No foods, no fun.
Some people went to the Irish hillside looking for anything they could eat. Discarded turnip tops, wild berries. Some even went so far as to cut off bull tails and roast them just to pick the meat from the bone. And as Matt so eloquently described earlier, some of these people who starved to death actually were found with like grass stains around their mouth, with stomachs full of leaves, sticks, and twigs, and like grass and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we're gonna cover all the dark details. Apparently,
There are also laws against fishing their own rivers, so they had to steal their own fish.
Oh, you
And,
steal
you know-
the king's deer, hunt the king's
Right.
deer in the king's
Yeah.
forest, and the blah blah blah. Yeah, yeah,
So-
of course.
Yeah, I
it's
see
all
Robin
owned by
Hood.
the crown.
Right.
along with all
Yeah.
the other issues a poor landless laborer had to deal with, the population of Ireland had gone from about 2.3 million people during the 1700s to about 8 million people during the 1840s.
Fucking 400%.
Specifically because of the potato. This population
But
jump
no,
was
dirty
literally
potato
made by
people.
population jump was literally made possible by the introduction of the calorie dense potato.
Right.
The
You, South America.
The population had exploded with such degree that Ireland was the most densely populated nation in Europe at the time.
It was the Jersey of Europe.
It was
oh fuck.
you mean the Joyzy.
Manhattan
Joyzy.
of fucking Europe.
Yeah, it is straight up. So, Prime Minister Robert Peel of England at the time sent over a scientific commission to investigate
Some douche.
the situation.
He's from Jersey too.
And after discovering that the situation was a dire one, the scientific commission decided to try and find different ways of eating these rotten potatoes. Because again, if they could get these poor Irish lazy bastards back to work, they could continue making money. So, they described several ways of cooking the rotten potatoes, some of which were to be mixed with the blood of livestock,
Oh, tastes
Or-
like copper.
or rubbing off the bad parts, or just boiling these rotten parts of the potato with heavy amounts of salt, rather. This was a goddamn detrimental leaflet. Now, mind you, not a lot of Irish people at the time spoke fucking English. So what they did was these scientific commissioners brought in pamphlets and like brochures and gave them to like clergymen and like teachers and stuff at the time who could translate that to Irish people. But like again, the Irish people didn't-
Telephone.
Yeah, they exactly. It was just like the he said she said kind of bullshit. And so
Another Limp Biscuit.
the detrimental
Wow,
the
dude. You gotta stop.
The detrimental part of this statement, the brochure that these guys had, was some of these people took their advice. The problem with the advice was the potatoes, once rotten, could not be eaten. In fact,
no, they're
they
toxic.
smelled so goddamn bad. You can hear about this in every account that you look up for the Irish Potato Famine. Basically, all anybody can talk about was how bad it smelled and how much everybody died. So I'm skipping over a bunch of this stuff. But anyway,
Yada yada.
even the healthy...
Imagine the diarrhea you get from eating that potato.
Even the healthy seeming
forward.
Even the healthy seeming parts of the tuber were still infected, and many who ate the rotting potatoes died. The most fascinating part of the story to me, again, is that food wasn't scarce in Ireland. There was plenty of it around, and the issue was that exporting the crops made more of a profit than selling it locally. The
Capitalism.
British were making money hand over fist during this time, because they owned all the land, by renting out their land, or by selling the food they owned, because the crops were their payment. And they would also be paid for renting out their land, which left extremely little money for the actual Irish people to buy the food of which they were growing. And despite their best efforts, like the soup kitchens and workhouses were often just subpar situations, which is where we get into some of this religious stuff, Matt, because this part really kind of fucked with me when I learned about it. Some soup kitchens run by Protestant clergy would only allow Irish laborers, because Irish laborers were always Catholic, according to the Times. They would only allow these laborers to eat if they renounced their Catholic religion and accepted the Protestant way of life. With many Irish being extremely devout Catholics, this led some to seeing the acceptance of soup as heretical at best. So it was fucking heresy. The people who did renounce their faith for a bowl of soup were then called supers derogatorily.
Supers.
Supers. It's super cool, guys.
It's very
Went
inventive
from a,
too.
what would they say, a crappie to a
Super.
Ah,
And so, like, there
which
was
is
just...
essentially what you called your landlord in Jersey.
Right.
Full circle.
That's exactly the 2 and 2 that I put together, too.
Yo, this potato blight as a organism is fucking gnarly, dude. It just like it's a crazy kind of fungus. It has like 2 or 3 different ways of reproducing, and one of them is like a mobile.
Yeah.
Like it's got a spore that can go places.
Oh yeah, me too.
Well, and that's one thing. Between, like, that's why between
Very
like,
Jersey.
that's why between like 1845 and the rest of the potato blight, like 1845 was only like half of the crops in like this certain region. There wasn't really like a big issue, but since the fog was so dense and the winds were so and just all the conditions in Ireland bred this spore. It, over the next 2 years, spread over across, I believe it was something like 90% of all the crops in Ireland. So when the original blight hit, you could go to your neighbor and be like, "Oh, your crop isn't isn't affected. Can you help me out?" But as the years and years progressed, it became where everybody, even your neighbor, your family, your friends, everybody was just desolate because this thing took over again. I believe like roughly 90% of the farms at one point.
And you thought spider mites were bad.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's in the soil. Like, you're going to take a good potato, you're going to put it in the fucking bad soil, and you're going to try and grow crop.
Yep.
And it's not going to work. And your crop is going to become infected.
Worse yet is that people would have an early harvest in August where they would like sometimes take the potatoes and keep the eyes because you can grow an entire part off of it. And they would plant those in their places. Now, if that particular potato had the blight, you just introduce that to your soil. And so along with it being able to live on the wind for a long time.
Because it's like a root.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. You take a potato with potato blight and then replant it in your crop and grow your crop off a blight potato.
And the blight fungus is like this weird fibrous. It makes these fiber, like it grows in like a strand.
Yeah, and it kills all parts of the potato too.
Yeah,
it's not just leaves.
Right.
So we talked about a little bit of the
potato
relief.
infected by it. It looks disgusting.
Yeah, there's still rampant occurrences of it, but we kind of talked about how like some of the relief efforts were like soup kitchens and stuff. But the soup kitchens were only one half of a cure that the British government decided that they would try. The other half was called workhouses. Workhouses were just a relief attempt by the British, and rather than giving what they saw as, quote, lazy, feckless Irish people free food, and encouraging, again, what they saw as, quote, handouts, they set
Damn
up
welfare
places,
queens.
They set up places where the Irish could work for food and shelter. You nailed it, man.
Yo, ain't that just like rich people ever to like keep a motherfucker down, and then the moment you just like not everything is perfectly aligned for you, they're like, "Oh, you're fucking lazy.
You're feckless and you don't give a shit." But these workhouses were more prisons
slave
than
labor.
Yeah. So they were more prisons than charities. When one would enter into a workhouse, they were separated by age. So the young, the middle-aged, and the old, they were all expected to live under the harsh rules of this warehouse, and they were separated. So the only time these families would see each other is on Sunday at church. Because again, religion is, goddamn.
It's cult mentality, man. All of it's cult mentality.
Yeah,
you know?
and some of the tasks that they were sent to do were just like arduous, and a lot of them fucking menial. In fact, some of the workhouses were so awful that people would break the very strict rules by fighting with each other, simply because if they could go to actual prison, food was better and conditions were not as harsh.
3 huts and a cot.
Right.
Yeah.
And So some of these jobs that they had were just like pushing around like these giant like grain wheels that were meant to break down like, you know, wheat and stuff, but they were for breaking down corn, breaking stones, and then going out and building roads with these stones, mending clothes and shipyard rope. And the tasks were just like long, menial, and just as arduous as they are boring.
Yeah, prison.
So-
you get some good labor. With
sometimes-
Do you remember the opening scene of Conan where he just ends up being the only guy still spinning the thing? Yeah.
Yeah,
That kind of work.
exactly. So, but sometimes there wasn't even enough work to go around. And so many people would either have to like not work that day, not be able to eat, or they just have to fucking leave and go like try to find food for their family. Additionally, some landlords saw workhouses as expensive ways of dealing with their starving tenants. And so they'd offer them free passages on ships, promising pay, food, and clothes, and ship them to the New World. Probably an equal number of individuals chose this same fate voluntarily. So rather than dying, they probably chose to leave. After several years, some saying 5, others closer to 7 or 8 years, the famine slowly waned. In 1852-ish, the potato crops had recovered, but it's believed nearly 1 million Irish people died during that time, and another 1.5 million left Ireland due to various parts of the world.
What year was that again? It's like 1850.
It was 1845 to 1852 or so.
All right, we'll just
So
call
now
it
that we've told these two stories, in our next part, we're going to talk about the reason I brought them up. COVID-19. Break! Discreet Cleaners is your choice for confidential cleaning.
We'll clean your
Carpet,
room
backseat,
or trunk,
house,
condo,
apartment,
boat, limo,
or bathtub.
with stains including
Blood,
brains,
guts,
bones,
piss,
shit,
vomit,
cum,
chocolate, and other stains including
dirt and mud,
wax candles,
rose petals,
broken glass, and Dear John letters.
discreet cleaners. We're here for you. Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth.
Where we teach your kids to swim through the flood and outrun the plague. We walk on water with our new core program.
We'll teach them to shoot, garden, hunt, skin, gut, and can all their own food.
T-shirts are available at sfsbfscfy.gov.
You can order the Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth manual at sfsbfscfy.gov.
Log on to the Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth to get 15% off on all tickets to all 3 days of the Christian Fest's He Is Written tour.
Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth.
Ready for revelations?
Now you will be.
With our new patented deep seed sowing technology and nutrient injection technology, we'd like to introduce you guys to the Vibe Aerator.
Yo, have you ever checked out the Vibe Aerator? It turned my dusty, dry lawn into a luscious, green, fertile bush in need of whacking.
You see what it does? Is it pushes juice deep down into your soil while laying as much seed as possible. In fact, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm going to go over to my friend Carlos, Texas Ranger over here. Carlos, what's been your experience?
Why, howdy, y'all. I can tell you firsthand my Mexican get his job done way faster. He went from Slowpoke Rodriguez to Speedy Gonzalez real quick. Go ahead, Jose. Tell him about that vibrator. My name is Jose. Bueno, pues cuando me recogieron en el Home Depot, me lo robé y quedé con el dinero de mi jefe, pero esa cosa jale bien chido. Ya le dije a todos mis friends. Está pero chingón, Vader. Gracias.
So you heard it first from Mr. Jose and Mr. Carlos, Texas Ranger. You can find this thing not just here on your radio or here if you're watching this on TV, but you can find this at Home Depot. In fact, I'd like to invite my friend Nick back here. Nick.
Yay. I mean, the Vibe Aerator. It's fertile. It's lush. It's green. It's bush.
You want to make your land fertile? You penetrate it deep using the Vibe Aerator.
Vibe aerator. Vibe aerator.
Vibe Aerator.
Ey, ya me van a dar los pinches 20 bolas, güey, ¿o qué?
Shut up.
¿Sabe?
This podcast is brought to you by Fourth Corner Productions, creating music, podcasts, and more in the greater Trinity County area. Welcome back to Black Sheep and Bad Apples. I'm your boy. I didn't like that at all. But I'm Lauren O'Brien. And
Nobody did.
Nobody liked that. So how are you guys feeling about the first two parts?
Horrible.
I feel great, man.
Yeah.
Well, my heart hurts.
Equal parts uncomfortable and depressed.
Yeah. I loved it for whatever reason.
I thought it was gonna be a real
Daisy
happy
feels-
and then I thought I was gonna have to bring it down the whole time.
Yeah, Daisy feels great
He's
already.
so excited how dark it's been this whole time, and he was
But we're
really
gonna start
worried that it
talking
would be
about,
too
like,
fun
puppies
and
kittens
lighthearted.
now.
So, as I said,
Glad you're not disappointed, Joe.
I told you guys the first two stories to talk to you guys about a story actually happening now during the pandemic that we're having. Both of those stories actually lead directly to COVID-19. And
Coronavirus.
But before we talk about the ties, I'm going to
Yo,
get...
I just realized this motherfucker brought Corona beer.
But he also brought a Modelo, so it's all good.
They
Balance
each
it
other
out. Yeah.
Corona familiar, bro, not the regular stuff.
Oh, right.
It's the one you already know. Familiar. I can translate it for you if you need.
I don't need you. You know what?
So,
I'll just go.
a small town in Middleton,
Oh, sorry.
There's a small town in Ireland called Middleton in County Cork, and it plays host to the Kindred Spirits sculpture. The sculpture consists of 9 20-foot feathers arranged in a circle on a concrete pad. Each of these stainless steel feathers are unique from one another and were designed by the students from the Crawford College of Art and Design, and was created by Alex Pentic from the, and I quote, Sculptury Factory in Cork. This sculpture is a monument to the kindness of the Choctaw Nations for their donations during the Irish Famine. You see, in 1833, the Choctaws, as we've discussed a little bit, experienced their third and final Trail of Tears, where they had been forcibly removed from their lands. It would be 11 years after one of the most difficult times of theirs that the people of the Choctaw Nation would hear about the decimation that was the Irish Potato Famine. After having suffered such hardships, the Choctaw Nation gathered together and gathered $170 of yesteryear's money to send to the Irish. Their $170, roughly, it's like $4,700 today. And there's some estimates that put it like closer to $20,000, but there's that information. Their $127 helped relieve some of the pressures of the Irish famine. A journalist from the Irish Times, Naomi Leary, wrote in an article, Native Americans raised a huge amount in famine relief for Ireland at the time when they had very little. It's time for which is her saying this. So translation, it's time for us to come through for them. So this was in 2019, actually this was in March 2020 rather. So
like 10 years ago. Or that's how it feels.
yeah. You had me at an utter loss for words.
I was like, whoa, Matt.
Is it 2030?
Matt, bro, Matt. It's, ooh.
Quarantine's been going real rough out here.
Yikes, Chihuahua.
So the Navajo and Hopi Nations recently created a GoFundMe for donations to help them during the coronavirus pandemic. And after O'Leary shared their fundraiser on Twitter, the fucking world lit up. Especially in Ireland, donations just have been coming in from everywhere, with the goal of raising $5 million for food, water, and other necessities. As this pandemic continues to sweep the country, leaving millions stuck at home without work and struggling to provide for even the barest necessities, fundamental flaws have been popping up all over our beautiful nation. Some of the hardest hit communities have been minorities and poor people, but it's also been ravaging the native nations as well. With communities having to shut down
We're both a minority and generally poor people.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And so with communities having to shut down, very similar, like they have to shut down too, much of their revenue has also been hit hard. From Axios.com here, I'm quoting, quote, "Tuh. Native Americans across the U.S. are struggling." Yeah, they said that in their quote. Quote, "Native Americans across the U.S. are struggling to battle the coronavirus pandemic as decades of poverty, poor health care, and pre-existing medical conditions leave them vulnerable to high rates of infection. The Navajo Nation, which stretches about 3 states and has been especially affected, is under its strictest weekend lockdown since the pandemic was declared." This is still quoting them, by the way. After the pandemic was declared after a spike in cases. The Navajo Times reports, that was bad quoting. After a spike in cases, the Navajo Times reports, "All gas stations and grocery stores must remain closed, and essential workers have been told to stay home until the order expires on Monday at 5 a.m. This is a couple weeks ago. So
That is so different than what everybody else is being told.
isn't it?
How crazy.
So the coronavirus has leached into fucking everybody's personal lives, and with tribes especially worrying about their elders that are being put in danger. And this is also exacerbated by pre-existing health conditions like heart disease, respiratory illness, and diabetes. Their elders are
From 4 centuries of fucking
abuse
and
Yeah.
and oppression.
And to the listeners who may not know, their elders are extremely important as they help keep the culture, language, customs, and values alive within the tribe. With the Navajo Department of Health reporting 3,632 cases of coronavirus, it's clear that the severity of the issue is one in which many different cultures can stand in solidarity. Perhaps it's even a glance into how similar we are as people. And just like the $170 donation given by the Choctaw people as a sign of solidarity, the Irish people have banded together to help, with one donation from a Pat Hayes having a note on their donation, quote, "From Ireland, 170 years later, the favor is returned, exclamation point, to our American brothers and sisters in your moment of hardship." The
Pretty good interest rate.
It is. The Irish donors alone have helped raise nearly $500,000 to help offset the costs of living during this pandemic, firmly acknowledging the solidarity between the two peoples with different cultures, religious beliefs, and histories. That this solidarity of things that they can share with one another.
That's so awesome. That's just like people seeing people as other people.
The fundraiser is now at $3.8 million of their $5 million goal as of the time of writing this. And if you want to donate, you can find more information at GoFundMe, quote, "Navajo and Hopi Families COVID-19 Relief Fund." So what I find the most beautiful thing about this is during the potato famine, the Choctaw Nation sent this money to the Irish people, $170 fucking dollars. And in an act of solidarity, 170 years later,
$170 in a time, I mean, like, that means a lot more, but also they're not, it's not just like a collection on the fucking, like, cul-de-sac. You know, this isn't like,
not at all.
These were fucking refugees.
Yeah.
They were people on the run. They were fucking being they were being assaulted daily by the political environment. They were being assaulted weekly, probably physically. You know, like, they still managed to scrape that shit up and send it to somebody they'd never fucking met.
They still, threw in a few pennies each.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the widow's mite story in the Bible. If you want to tie that back to religion,
Which we don't.
I don't think you really realize how well I can wield this little tiny mic stand as a bludgeon, sir.
No, but that's kind of the positive news that I wanted to give you guys after, 2 different sections of negative news, because for me, it's the fact that in 2015 they built this monument to the donation that the Choctaw Nation had given the Irish people. They had, put this in County Cork, Ireland. And so for me, when I read this story, I was like, I have to reiterate this. This is, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, Sean and Sam challenged me to do something positive. And so what I really want to do is highlight, like, how people from just across different parts of this globe can really stand together and show each other what it means to be like, we're brothers in this fucking world. And it's fucking important that we really stand together, especially during times like this COVID-19 pandemic bullshit. It's
Yeah, coronavirus is really taxing our GoFundMe healthcare system.
it really is, which is sadly the fucking truth.
Credit to the Onion for that one.
The Onion, if you want to sponsor us.
I mean, that's the most accurate news source I can access.
Like, if you just want to send us little, like a editorial we'll read at the end, just something short, a paragraph, that'd be cool too. Just plug us, we'll plug you, The Onion. Hey, plug.
So, do you guys have any final thoughts about the Trail of Tears?
I know Sam does.
Irish Famine.
I don't have final thoughts. I've never had a final thought in my life.
He said, finalizing what he was saying.
It just comes straight out his mouth. It doesn't have the upper
It's
deck
just-
thing.
And if you really think about it, the energy dissipates forever. So
I mainly
You're gonna
think
turn
like,
into a
fuck
string
Hobo
one
Johnson.
that's true.
That is the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Here.
The moral
No,
of
no, no.
tonight's...
It's not fuck Hobo Johnson anymore. Not
ha-
today. It's fuck this. What was it? Fuck the established order,
The status quo.
status quo. Thank you.
I got you, baby.
That's what it
Fuck status quo.
was. Fuck the status quo.
Hashtag.
I'm gonna stay with
Alright,
Hobo
yeah, so
Johnson. 'cause he's the
hashtag
most status
fuck
quo
Hobo
rapper
Johnson.
I've ever seen in my
Hashtag
life.
fuck the status quo.
Right. It's a euphemism.
Yeah.
Right.
Hashtag fourth corner.
Put a hat on a hat.
His flow
Hashtag
is
black
status
sheep
quo.
and bad apples, baby. BS and BA, bitch.
Sick.
Ow,
Sick
ow.
rhymes.
So, do you guys have any final thoughts before we shut this shit down?
I got a song that actually ties a lot of this
Turn his
together.
mic off.
If you want me to play it. What do you
I
think
mean,
of that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and
Pass me that acoustic.
fuck. Yeah, here this first time impromptu.
Matt
And our
the
special
resident
guest, Matt.
musician.
We're gonna go ahead and host Matthew Wallace. You can find him on Instagram, right?
And Mean Matt Music. Go to my website, MatthewWallaceMusic.com. This is a new one.
Hell yeah.
Inspired by this whole coronavirus.
Here we go. Matt's taking it.
They canceled all the funerals and outlawed all the wakes. If you pray to the wrong gods, they'll burn you at the stake. Can't see off our ancestors, can't teach our progeny. Rather keep you in the dark, living on rice and beans. Well, there's a man with a submachine gun, and he's standing at the gate. His dead eyes demand to see your papers from the state. Can't travel down the highways, can't walk down Main Street. Rather keep you in the dark, living on rice and beans. Well, they canceled all our gatherings and closed off all the cafes. Well, the Firebird's in the stable, just waiting on the day we face up to our oppressors, give them hell to pay. Can't trust the imitators that show up on the scene. Tired of hiding in the dark, living on hopes and dreams. Tired of hiding in the dark, living on hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
Thanks. That is obviously a new one.
Thank you, man. That was actually a very good impromptu addition to this podcast.
Matthew Wallace, you never cease to amaze me, sir.
Yeah. So
Thank you for that song.
Go ahead
For sure.
and drop some plugs, and we'll shut this shit down.
Yeah,
Where
man,
can we find you?
MatthewWallaceMusic.com. Mean Matt Music on Instagram. That's all you need. I don't do that Facebook.
You got a PayPal, Venmo.
Oh, yeah. If you want to do paypal.me/Matthew Wallace and drop a tip in the jar, that'd be appreciated.
Hell yeah.
All right.
I'll take money too if you want to just give me some money somewhere.
Yeah, and because I'm a firm believer in workers' rights, I will distribute all tips equally.
Hell yeah, I was here.
Nailed it.
That's right.
So,
Marcus only gets half because he don't have a microphone.
all right.
And the Bible tells me so.
All right. So, Matt, thank you for being here. Mr.
Thanks for
Sam,
having
is there
me.
anything you like to plug? Anything?
Nah, man.
Yeah.
This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, I always love the way you get my fucking ire up a bit.
Yeah,
You
just a
know,
little
but
bit. It's really
I did
fun.
like this episode a lot. I
Thank you.
really did. You didn't fail to deliver on your promise of 2 terrible things and 1 really wonderful thing at the end.
Hell yeah. I'm glad for that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Dacey, Mr.
Oh.
Joe.
Fantastic.
Thank you
man.
for being
That was
here.
a great time.
Yeah, it's
You want to
always
get a little dark? I could tell you some other stuff later on off the
yeah,
podcast.
and we're definitely gonna have to collaborate on
I don't want
something
to
much
trigger
more dark
any,
than this
like,
episode.
keywords.
B-side episode 32,
Yeah,
retorts.
yeah. Catch us
From
on
Joe.
the Patreon. It's probably soon to come.
the dark
Mr.
side.
Mr. Producer Man,
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to thank you for all the work that you did. How do you think that I did tonight too? Because I've been busting my ass on this.
I
shit.
definitely threw me for a couple loops.
Yeah, you were, it was like 2 darks and a light, bro.
Not gonna lie, you definitely brought that up at the beginning, and then I didn't really see it coming. It was still a little sidewinder, so
Hell yeah.
it was good. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can we find you online?
Oh, it looks like we're gonna go on Black Sheep and Bad Apples on the YouTube right
Oh,
now, or you
yeah.
can also check it out on Fourth Corner Music on Facebook. And until we get another YouTube channel and
Yeah.
other things, we'll update from there.
Yeah, we've also got a band, Merit Parcel. You can check us out at meritparcel.com. I want to let you guys know that you've been listening to Black Sheep and Bad Apples, and I thank you for it. And I'm your podcast host, Lauren O'Brien. Peace!